We have a few questions from the chat. The first one is from Prasadi. Dear Ajahn, amongst lay people, how easy is it to attain stream entry? How many lay people do you know who attain stream entry? What are they like in their personal and personality and practice? For example, are they academic or analytical in their Buddhist practice, or more reflective and intuitive?
Well, one thing about the Buddhist path of practice, we chant it when we reflect on the Dhamma, in the three refuges, Buddha, Dhamma, Sangha. We say the Dhamma is pachatang. The wise know for themselves. So the fruits of Dhamma practice are to be realized individually by each practitioner. So one of the effects of that is that anyone who's realized Dhamma to whatever level will tend not to be rushing out to tell everyone or speak much about it. Maybe if they're in a position of leadership, they might teach Dhamma, but still they won't be talking so much about their personal realizations, because they are personal realizations. You can only explain them to others in a very imperfect way. Monks even have rules that, we're not allowed to go around boasting around about progress in the path and attainments and achievements and so on. But whoever it is, these attainments, results that come through the practice are personal. So you might never know who's a Sotapanna or not. And people love to guess. It's almost like a sort of pastime. Perhaps it's a sign of the restless mind. In practicing the Dhamma, we have plenty of times when we're peaceful and content to practice, but then we'll also have times when we're distracted and looking for distraction. So the distracted mind might have a pastime of trying to guess who's an arahan, who's enlightened, who's a Sotapanna, whether it's Sangha or lay people that we're turning our attention to. When I was a young monk, you like to sit down. We call it kind of tea time conversation. You sit down, have a cup of tea with someone, and you talk about, well, who's attained and who do we think is enlightened and so on. But you never really know. You might guess. So obviously there's the descriptions in the texts about the qualities of a Sotapanna, a stream enterer, whether it's Sangha or laity. Are they going to keep the 5 precepts? They're going to have unshakable faith in Buddha, Dhamma, Sangha. Almost certainly they'll be able to meditate and overcome the hindrances, even if they don't have mastered the jhanas. They'll have experience of samadhi because they have to be able to set their hindrances aside to contemplate defilement and let go of defilement. And there are those lay people who have done this. They live by the 5 precepts. They have unshakable faith in Buddha, Dhamma, Sangha, and they seem to be able to meditate and overcome the hindrances. I've met lay people like that, so I believe they still exist in the world. But of course, there's no register of names. It's not like you can go to the phone book. In the old days, there'd be a phone book, or you can Google it. Please give me the list of all Sotapannas in the world. You might be able to get somebody's impression of who they think is a Sotapanna, but that will be a very personal impression, and whether it's accurate or not, it may be subject to disagreement by other people. But it doesn't exist, does it? The register of Sotapannas. Maybe we should have some kind of organization that confirms who's a Sotapanna and gives you a little registration number, title, or document, and then you go around, you give your Dhamma talk, and you show them your registered Sotapanna certificate first, just so that everyone listens to you. Might be good. It means people listen more intently, so it may have a benefit. But of course, it's not going to happen. And probably the biggest problem would be fraud and all these people who think they're sotapannas when they're not. Ajahn Chah used to joke about that, how quite a few monks thought they were sotapannas, and then a few years later they fall in love with someone disrobed, and he said, "Oh, a lot of those sotapannas have ended up married back in the lay life." For lay people, I guess it's harder to tell, isn't it? Because lay people live in their own world, their home, their workplace, whatever their lifestyle is, and other people may not really know what level of practice they're on. So I'd focus on your own practice, number one. And then if you meet lay people who you find inspiring, they seem to be reliable people, keep the precepts, practice meditation regularly. If they're your friends or you associate with them, or you may get to know that they have very deep insights into karma and abandoning defilements, and you may get to sense that somebody is quite advanced on their practice. You probably never know whether they're a sotapanna or not, but you might find there are those people around who are quite reliable. But you'll probably also have to be prepared for a few shocks, because sometimes, whether it's sangha or lay people, you find people who you thought were very advanced and reliable in their practice. Later on, they degenerate, as it were, from their practice and break the precepts or disrobe if they were sangha, or if they were lay people, maybe start doing things that are not in line with the Buddha's teachings, or teaching things that are not in line with what the Buddha said. And you realize, oh, they weren't sotapanna, they can't be, because they're no longer following the Buddhist path or keeping precepts or meditating or whatever. So unfortunately that happens. So Ajahn Chah just used this reflection all the time, is that it's not sure, it's not certain. Somebody may be a sotapanna, but maybe they're not. Don't give too much importance to that way of thinking. Come back to look at your own mind. What's going on in your own mind? Is your greed increasing? Your aversion increasing? Your delusion increasing? Is your faith in Buddha Dhamma Sangha increasing? Reflect on the basics of the practice. Come back to there and work on yourself, because that's what you can really know. And other people, you can only have a more superficial knowledge. And some people get deluded. They delude themselves, or they're deluded by others. So you maybe meet a teacher who says you're a sotapanna when you're not. If you believe them, you're in trouble, because then you're going to be deluded. Or you may have your own thought, I am a sotapanna, and you're not, and you're deluding yourself, and that happens as well. Funny experience once, there was a monk who thought he was an arahan when he wasn't. And he went to see a really well-practiced monk who lived on top of a mountain. And this well-practiced monk, Lumpur Gosame, lived on the top of the mountain. He was very good at reading people's minds and knowing who was a sotapanna or an arahan. And this monk, who thought he was an arahan but he wasn't, came up to the top of the mountain to meet the teacher. And there's no road up this mountain. You could only walk up hundreds of steps. So it's a very kind of peaceful, suitable place to meditate. And the teacher lived up there, and the would-be arahant came up the mountain and bowed to the teacher. He didn't say, I am an arahant, but that's what he was thinking. And so the teacher was sitting there, and he had a copy of the Tripitaka, one of the books full of suttas, next to him, and he picked it up and he banged it on the head of the monk who thought he was enlightened. Not violently, not to hurt him, but just in the way teachers used to do in the old days. Teachers sometimes they bang the textbook on your head, tap on it to kind of drums a point into you. Well, they did when I was a kid anyway. I don't think they're allowed to do it now, but in those days they did. They bang the textbook on your head. And in this case, the teacher said, here comes the self-proclaimed arahant. And the teacher and the monk was so embarrassed, because he had been kind of rumbled, that he bowed and quickly disappeared, never went back again. So beware of the voice in your own head that says you're a Sotapanna or an arahan, or the voice that says someone else is a Sotapanna or an arahan. Maybe look more at the principles of good practice, keeping precepts, meditating, reflecting on the Dhamma, seeing the three characteristics in your experience. And if you practice and cultivate the Noble Eightfold Path, the Buddha said the world will not be free from enlightened beings if people are practicing this. So we all do our own bit. Practice for yourself, and you're contributing to the good of the whole religion, the good of everyone.
Sadhu Lumpo. Next question from Meiso. Asking for a friend with a teenager child who is going through a challenging time. The teenager has seen psychologists and psychiatrists and is currently taking medication. However, even with medication, there are times when a teenager is not acting normal, such as talking nonsensically, especially before bedtime. Could it be that some evil elements are affecting the teenager? And is there anything that can be done from a spiritual perspective, such as blessing, chanting, etc.? Family members have advised them to go to Malaysia and Singapore to seek out monks who can cast out evil spirits. What would Ajahn advice be to my friend?
Well, to be honest, I would say that's not the most important remedy. Keep seeing the doctor and the psychiatrist and taking medication, and you have to realize it's going to take a while. This is not some easy fix thing. So you need the patience. Sure, the rest of the family can provide lots of loving kindness and compassion, chanting, meditation, goodwill, guidance, and a good environment for the teenager. But they themselves are going to have to work through this. And their number one problem is their own internal confusion more than evil spirits and things. I'm not saying it is or it isn't in respect to those things, but I'd say the most important thing is working on their own internal confusion. And that's why medication, psychiatrists, and so on can help. And then a lot of patient, loving kindness from the family. And when it's appropriate, get them to do skillful things, particularly practicing different kinds of dana, helping others in small ways, if that's all that's possible. You can help, any kind of volunteering or helping members of the family. Doing things that are helpful to other people is a very therapeutic but also good kind of karma that will help them. Keeping the 5 precepts as best they can. So you're not killing, stealing, sexual misconduct, not lying, not taking intoxicants. So keeping precepts, practicing dana, I say, is the foundation for recovery. Loving, supportive environment. Hearing Dhamma is good. So yes, meeting monks to hear Dhamma, hear good advice, listening to inspiring Dhamma stories and so on. And you can do all of that off the internet as well as in person. All of that actually will also help protect against any kind of evil forces in the world and evil spirits without having to go to see any special kind of person who may actually make things worse by reinforcing your superstition and belief in things you can't actually see and prove. And that's part of the problem. If you're in a confused state, this teenager is a confused state, and they're being told about stuff that they can't see, can't prove, it's only going to feed the imagination and feed their fears and their confusion, I would say. I don't think it's going to help. I'd say better to practice the good Dhamma dana, generosity, charity, helping, kindness, sila, some moral restraint. They may not be ready for meditation yet, so just accept that. But listening to Dhamma, they can surely read or listen to Dhamma and just work from there very patiently, slowly, helping them to recovery. Maybe that's the best advice I can give you at the moment. Take it from there.
Sadhu Lumpo. The next question is from C. Hi Ajahn, how can I resist the urge of binge eating?
It's a hard one in this world because there's so much nice food around. As we know, I think I mentioned it before, somebody showed me the clip of Miss Universe saying if you scrapped all the rules of discipline you keep to become Miss Universe for a day, what would you do? And she said, I'd eat all the food in the world twice over. And there's so much good food out there, it's hard, isn't it? In brief, you need mindfulness and wise reflection to bring up the discipline and to see the harm of binge eating. So mindfulness and wise reflection might lead you to stay away from the sources of your desire. So stay away from the kitchen, the fridge, restaurants, cafes, supermarkets. Minimize your exposure to the thing that you're attached to. And tell your trusted friends and family what you're doing and why, so that they can help. So maybe they can limit your exposure as well. They can be aware of the problem. Addictions, you need good environment. So you need to be staying away from the thing that you're addicted to. You need good friends, so you're not with people who will encourage you in the wrong direction to eat more, or come and eat this, try this. They know the problem, so they can help you. And then you reflect on the harm of and the pointlessness of binge eating, in that you don't need the food because you're already well fed. So you have to get down to that point where you can be restrained enough just to eat enough, the right amount, and reject further food. So it is a tricky one. Like something like cigarettes or alcohol, you can just cut out because you don't need it to live. And sometimes that's the best way with addictions. You just cut the thing out. But with binge eating, you can't, because you need food to survive. So it is a tricky one. So you learn about what are the triggers for it. Basically it's habit. And habit is defeated by mindfulness. So you're more aware when the habitual desire comes up, you're aware of it. And then you have to have a strategy, and that's the wisdom. You say, no, I want to eat this. You say, no. Sometimes someone around you says no, sometimes, but what you tend to do is go sneaky then. So when you're on your own, you have to say no as well. And it comes down to saying no to yourself. I've had enough. I've eaten enough for today. You say no, and you stay away from the places where the food is. You keep reminding yourself why you're doing it, because you don't want to overeat, because it's unhealthy. Long term, it will give you all kinds of health problems. You don't look so good. You don't feel so good. You reflect on all the disadvantages of overeating. Because you have to eat, you sometimes have to approach it in a more practical way and say, okay, I'm going to eat this much. And you just make plans for yourself, diets and plans, and tell yourself what you're going to eat, and then make sure all the excess that you would binge on is not around. You eat what you allow yourself to eat. And then that's when you kick in with that, no, I'm not going to eat anymore. And you move away and find other things to occupy yourself with, things that you enjoy, things that bring up happiness in other ways, to move away from the binge eating as a remedy for boredom or depression or whatever it is that may be the underlying causes. You also have to find some other useful things to do. Some extreme solutions, like one is, there was one family I knew, they had two sons who liked their food, and the mum took them to India on pilgrimage to the Buddhist holy sites, and they saw all the beggars and the poverty of India and the problems that people in poorer societies go through. And it changed their outlook. They came back and they were much more disciplined, much more appreciative of what they had, complained less, and were more disciplined in things like eating. So maybe you have to also look around at the world a bit to get the inputs to help you get the strength of mind to say no to the binge eating. Obviously seek help from maybe organizations or individuals who have been through this and know good ways to help you. There's a few things you can do. That's important as well, to realize you're not trapped. It's not a hopeless situation. There are things you can do. You have to develop your own personal discipline, but also there may be some good friends who can help, and then organizations, individuals who may be able to give you good strategies as well.
Sadhu Lumpo. The next question is from Wonder Woman Diana. Dear Ajahn, thank you for your teaching. May I know the term that you use when you spoke about merit being different from it, that merit is not enough?
I just talked briefly on the difference between making merit, which is, the Pali word is punya, and making kusala karma, wholesome or skillful karma, which is part of the Buddhist path to enlightenment, and ultimately for letting go of kilesa, the causes of suffering, greed, anger, and delusion, and particularly the delusion of self. Thing with merit is it's a broader term, a catch-all term, and it can refer to worldly happiness, doing things that bring you what we call worldly happiness, sensual happiness. So obvious one might be making money. You make money, and money can be used in a good way, but we often look at someone who's got a lot of wealth or knowledge or fame and fortune, all the things we term as worldly happiness. We look at them, we say, oh, they got a lot of merit. And in one sense, in the worldly sense, that's true. But they may not yet have much insight into the path and the way of practice that leads to Nibbana. That needs kusala Dhamma, that needs listening to the Dhamma, reflecting on the Dhamma, and ultimately developing mindfulness and wisdom and insight through meditation. And they're not necessarily synonymous. They can be. A lot of people who make merit and have merit are also making wholesome karma and practicing with faith in the Buddha and practicing for Nibbana. But sometimes they're not. Sometimes they're separate. So it's just making a distinction there between these two terms. If we're honest, you look in the world, sometimes people are successful in a worldly sense. They've got power, fortune, but they may actually be making a lot of bad karma. They may be quite cruel or selfish people, or taking advantage of others, hurting others, causing trouble in the world, which will come back on them, unfortunately. So clearly they're not following the Buddhist path to Nibbana. They're still making a lot of bad karma, but they may on the outside seem to have merit. They may have money and wealth and power. So it's just a distinction between, you might say, worldly success and spiritual success, and they're not always matching.
Sadhu Lumpo. The next question is from Nick V. Thank you for sharing this wisdom with us, Ajahn. I am curious about the difference between Samata and vipassana meditation. Could you please provide some guidance on how to practice each? Additionally, how do we determine when to use one versus the other? Also, despite regular and dedicated practice, my mind seems to become more and more restless. Could you please help to understand what to do about it to advance my practice?
A really good question that's probably relevant to everyone. Probably don't have enough time here to give you the long answer, but I'll have to give you the short answer. Calm and insight, or samatha and vipassana, yeah, they're two aspects of meditation which are both essential. One thing to remember, it's the one mind that practices these. So samatha and vipassana arise in the one same mind. Therefore, the question you probably have is, when do you practice one, or when do you develop one, and when do you develop the other? Really, they're developing together. It's just you might at times emphasize one over the other. The Buddha even said, there's no jhana without wisdom. To develop samatha means to develop the skill in concentrating your mind, calming your mind, focusing the mind on an object such as the breath, for example, and overcoming the 5 hindrances: sensual desire, ill will, sloth, torpor, restlessness, agitation, and skeptical doubt. But as you're doing that, you will be gaining wisdom and insight at the same time, except for the emphasis is on developing samadhi, one-pointedness, and overcoming the hindrances. And this is the foundation for developing or deepening your insight, vipassana insight, into the 3 characteristics of existence: impermanence, unsatisfactoriness, not self. So there's a sort of one thing helping the other. And sometimes we develop vipassana, which deepens our samatha, which is something you don't always hear about from teachers, but monks tend to understand this point. You practice a lot of reflection and insight meditation, your samadhi will improve, your ability to overcome the hindrances will improve. You develop samatha, this will improve your ability to overcome the 5 hindrances, and this will deepen your insight and your vipassana, and they both help each other. But to completely eradicate defilement, greed, anger, delusion from the mind, you need both. You need to be beyond the hindrances, and you need to be reflecting very deeply on the 3 characteristics. As you become more experienced in meditation, you'll get to know when to do which. And you might, generally speaking, develop samatha first in a meditation session. Say you're meditating for an hour, for example. You might put your effort, first of all, into just calming the mind, overcoming the hindrances, and making the mind one-pointed. You may achieve that, you may not, but that may be your main emphasis in the beginning of that meditation. And then when you become more calm, you may develop more insight meditation. The second half of your hour or whatever, or the last part of your hour, you're reflecting on impermanence in your body, feelings, thoughts arising, passing away. You're observing and developing insight into that, for example. But sometimes, whatever you do, your mind won't settle down, and there's just restlessness, as you say. Or maybe you just go straight into your vipassana and you're just observing the arising and passing away of thoughts endlessly, which is what restlessness is, agitation of mind. And that may bring you to a state of calm later through your effort in vipassana. So it's not wrong to sometimes try vipassana first. But over time, through experience, you'll get to see what you need, what works for you to calm the mind, overcome the hindrances, what areas to develop insight by reflecting on your experience. You'll get to know, partly through experimenting, partly through knowing yourself and what things work. So there's no one absolute answer here. You have to kind of feel your way through experience, through practicing. But both of these aspects of meditation are important. You can't just do one without the other. They support each other.
Sadhu Lumpo. The next question is from Angela. Dear Lumpo, how to deal with feeling self-conscious or anxious in doing puja, like circumambulating holy object or stupa in public places when one lives in a non-majority Buddhist country? Sometimes this feeling prevents one from doing some merit that it later causes regret in having passed over chances to do some good. Thank you very much.
Yeah, I think everyone who's practicing Buddhism in a non-Buddhist country might feel this sometimes. Well, number one, you want safety and security, so obviously don't do things that are going to provoke people if you really. But I mean, I think that's quite rare nowadays in the world. If you've got a Buddhist center, temple, or chedi or whatever, and you're doing Buddhist practice in that place, most people will let you get on with it. You may still have that awkward feeling if there are people around who are not familiar with what you're doing, but I would just ignore them as long as you're safe. Of course, you don't want to do something that makes you unsafe. That is the bottom line, I guess. But, feelings of awkwardness will pass if you get used to something and you know why you're doing it and you're appreciating the benefits of it, they gradually fade. So like, for myself, becoming a Buddhist monk, at first I felt awkward because I wasn't used to it. And, becoming a Buddhist monk, shaving your head, wearing robes, it's quite a radical step. And it's certainly different from what I was brought up with. But in Thailand, I was in Thailand, most people know what Buddhist monks are. It's quite normal. So I quickly didn't feel awkward. I just quickly felt, it's okay because there's a lot of monks around and everyone knows what they are. But then when you travel abroad, say like coming to Australia or going home to England where I live, there might be that feeling again of self-consciousness, just being a Buddhist monk walking through a public place. But I was talking to a monk yesterday. I think nowadays, even in non-Buddhist countries, everyone knows what a Buddhist monk is, more or less. They see a monk, they're much more a more familiar sight than when I began. So you don't really need to feel that awkward. It always depends on time and place, of course. It depends who you're with, where you are. But generally speaking, I don't think you need to feel awkward anymore. And you have to remind yourself of that. People will allow you to get on with your religious practice, do your circumambulation. If you're doing a good thing, trust in that. You're keeping precepts, you're not hurting anyone, you've got faith in the Buddha Dhamma Sangha, you're in a place of worship or worshipping in a place, do it. And you'll probably find the awkward feeling fades by doing it and just ignoring that feeling. You're acknowledging it, but then you just let it go and move on. And don't dwell on the awkward feeling, but put your mind more on the good that you're doing. Worship the Buddha Dhamma Sangha. If you're in a non-Buddhist country, but they have a stupa there, well, go and just think of the Buddha. Don't think of the people around you. Spend less time thinking or worrying about the people around you and more time thinking of Buddha Dhamma Sangha and your practice and the good that you're doing. And then, look for opportunities when you can do more of it. Sometimes it helps to have friends as well. So if you're with other people who are like-minded of faith, that will help. Even if you're on your own, just get on with it. And you're not hurting anyone, so you really don't have to feel awkward. Just be patient with it all and keep practicing. until you just don't think about it anymore.
Sadhu Lumpur. The next question is from iPhone. Thank you, Ajahn, for the Dhamma talk. Please kindly explain more about the two layers practice about self and not self. Thank you.
Oh, again, a big topic. But briefly, it's just to be aware that we practice on these two levels. You might call it the conventional level and the ultimate level. The technical term is samadhi satcha, samadhi banyati. Samadhi means what we create in our mind. So like rules and conventions and ways of doing things that human beings tend to agree on and say, we're going to do it this way. This is the right way of doing something. And then Paramata Satcha means ultimate reality, which is beyond that. The fact of human being is made up of these elements I was talking about earlier today, the four elements, physical elements, and then the mind. These four elements that you're looking at when you look at a human being, earth, air, fire, and water, don't know that they're male, female, young, old. They don't know the conventions and cultural conditioning of the land that you're in. Those four elements are not Buddhist. They're not anything. They're just four elements. But we, with our mind, add on this sense of self. So we have a human being and we have a name and a history and all our beliefs and thoughts and opinions and conditioning. This is all the conventional reality of a person. And it's useful for communication and going about our business on that level. But it's also a source of suffering, isn't it? Because we attach to their conventions and they can be a cause for division and disagreement and conflict. They can be a cause for delusion. They can be a cause for kilesa, greed, anger, and delusion to arise. When you bring your mind to stillness through meditation, improve your mindfulness, and then your insight, you're seeing through to the ultimate reality, at least hopefully having glimpses of it, where the mind is letting go of the conventional reality, the conventional sense of self, and you're seeing the ultimate reality. So say your mind is peaceful in meditation on the breath and you become really still. All the thoughts and distractions fade. You're just knowing the breath in, the breath out, or even just knowing the mind itself. There's no sense of being a man, a woman, young, old, Western, Asian, Buddhist, non-Buddhist, someone who likes listening to music, sport, like certain kinds of food, is a good person, is a bad person, is this, is that. It's all gone. There is just the knowing. There's the breath in, the breath out. The breath doesn't have any sense of self or identity. The mind that is with mindfulness at that point, it's still quiet. There's no identity. There's no personal history or personality. There's a past, of course, but currently when you're in that state of stillness, it's all gone. So you have a nice rest from everything that you normally attach to. So you're going through to the ultimate reality, if only temporarily. You keep doing that, then your perception and understanding and awareness of ultimate reality improves. Then you see through the conventional reality and see it more for what it is, which is superficial, the superficial appearance of things. But it's not the deep down truth of things, is it? It's superficial. Earth, air, fire, and water are not male or female. They're just elements. The mind that knows is not male or female. It's just the mind. It's not rich, poor, smart, stupid, good, bad, all the superficial attributes that we describe people with. They are superficial. They're assumptions, they're labels, they're names. So that's the ultimate reality. And the meditation and training brings you to that. But to begin with, you also have to work with the more conventional truth, and you have to accept that, and you work with it. So you have to learn how to be good on both levels, on the superficial level and the ultimate level.
Sadhu Lumpo. The next question is from Samsung SM S908E. Am I correct to say arahan creates no karma? If so, how do we reconcile with your advice that we should practice to create kusala karma or wholesome karma?
Well, like the previous question, in order to go beyond karma, you have to make karma first. So the Buddha talked about the practices like, getting on a raft to go across the ocean, paddling your raft. That's like you, the person, making good karma, cultivating the path of sila, samadhi, panya. You get to the other side, nibbana, but you can leave your raft on the shore. You don't need to carry it around on your back with you. So the arahan has reached the unconditioned. They've realized the unconditioned or no self. So they no longer make karma. There's no more attachment. There's no more karma making qualities in the mind. There's no more wanting or attaching. So when the arahant dies, they're not reborn again because they've made no more. They're making no more karma to be reborn. So nibbana means the end of birth and death. If there's still attachment, craving attachment in the mind, then the individual will be reborn. They're still making karma. They still have a sense of self. That's the difference. But the arahant is still receiving the fruits of their karma because obviously before they were arahant, before they reached the unconditioned, they were still within the conditioned realm and they were still making good and bad karma. So they're receiving as long as they're alive, they're receiving the fruits of their past karma. So even arahants have accidents, get sick, have people dislike them and scold them or whatever. But they're not making fresh karma. So this life will be the last life. They have to endure all of that. But until we've reached that point, we're making karma. So make good karma and avoid making bad karma. And the good karma will get you to the unconditioned, to the nibbana. Quickly, I hope.
Next question is from ST Lee. Ajahn Kalyano, when you discuss the paradox of conventional self versus non-self, if the coexist, then we can carry on with the development of wholesome and positive karma without having to let go of self. Can Lumpo comment on this?
Well, you can up to a point, but the whole point is if there's still attachment to self, it will slip into your experience and it will manifest as suffering. So even good karma, when attached to with self, becomes suffering. For example, you meditate and you come quite peaceful because you're letting go of these hindrances and the greed, anger, delusion, and the coarse sense of self, you might say. But then, having experienced a state of stillness, bliss, peace, which is good, and it's part of the path, it's not wrong at all. But then afterwards, a sense of self goes, oh, that's me, that's who I am. Maybe you even think you're enlightened, or at least you think this is good. I've achieved this. Where will the suffering come? Well, maybe the next time you meditate, you can't achieve it. It disappears. Oh, I can't get it back again. So the sense of self is disappointed and it reforms in the mind. The disappointed self, because you can't attain the same bliss that you had before. Or maybe someone else comes along and say, you've just been lying. You didn't attain any bliss. You're just making it up. Maybe the sense of self will feel annoyed with this person who's, speaking rubbish, whatever. the sense of self will form even around the good karma we make, and it will introduce suffering into our experience. So you have to keep reflecting on that. Oh, it's not sure. I call this blissful state me, but it's not sure. It's not really me. It's still a conditioned thing. It arises, it passes away. And when you see that, there's a letting go of self. Doesn't mean to say you stop stop meditating and developing blissful experiences. It just means you are seeing that it's not self. If you keep seeing not self in the good and the bad karma, eventually you'll give up. You'll tire of making karma, and you won't make karma anymore. You won't want anything. You won't attach to anything. But that comes through reflecting, particularly on the suffering that comes from attachment. And you can even attach to the good that you do. So it's one area of contemplation we still have to develop. It's not like you develop, you practice dana, help people, keep precepts, you meditate, and you sit back and say, oh, I've done it all. You have to be careful, because the sense of self may be tricking you into contentment. And the Buddha said, the thing that kept him going all the way to enlightenment was being discontent even with the good that he had done. You can't say it's good enough. You have to keep practicing in case you've got it wrong, and in case it wasn't what you thought it was.